Let me welcome everybody. Let me welcome you to this week's Future Trends Forum. I'm very glad to see and hear all of you today. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm the forum's creator and host, as well as the cat herder. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. In order to begin, let me just quickly introduce the forum. Let me explain what it is, where it came from, who supports it. Then I'll introduce this week's awesome guest. So to begin with, you should know that the forum is a discussion-based tool. What I'm doing right now with this couple of slides is going to stop very soon. The rest of this is just conversation between all of us here. It's a spin-off of a monthly report I do called the Future Trends of Technology and Education Report. That's a monthly trends analysis that takes a look at major trends that are reshaping education and technology worldwide. If you haven't seen it, just go to ftte.us, download a few sample copies, and you can enjoy and learn more. I'd love to hear what you think. Now, the FTTE report and the Future Trends Forum are part of a broader project called the Future of Education Observatory. And this is a multimedia, participatory, ongoing attempt to grapple with the future of education and technology. So it includes the FTTE report, it includes this forum that we're participating in right now. It also includes a blog, it includes a book club, along with a bookstore, and some other efforts just about to pop up. So if you haven't seen that, just head to futureofeducation.us and learn more. Now, all of those efforts can only persist through the support of some very, very generous people, and I'd like to thank them before we proceed. First of all, I'd like to thank NYSERNet from New York State. That's a nonprofit that helps that state's colleges, universities, and other organizations get on broadband internet and do terrific stuff through networks. They do pretty amazing work, and I'm really grateful to them for their support. We're also grateful to Shindig, because as you can tell, they make available the technology we're using right now. So let me just take you through that, just so if you haven't seen it recently, or if you're new to it, so let me explain how it works. This is a video conferencing platform, but it's a little different from some of the other ones out there. It has some unusual affordances. So to begin with, where I am right now, and where this slide is called the stage. And we call it that because everyone can see and hear everything that's on the stage. So you can join us. I'll show you how in just a second. Right below us, you can see dozens and dozens of people, either represented by a video feed, let's see, Catherine Boyle right now, smiling at us from Scotland. You might see Ben, who is a static photo, or you can see Stephen Kane, who is silhouette. And each of those represents a single sign-in, usually a person, sometimes several people, and you can just follow them as those little avatars move back and forth. In fact, if you'd like to have a private conversation with one of them, just double-click on their icon. And if they want to talk to you, your two icons will click together like Legos. You have your own private audiovisual bubble, which is pretty neat. Now, how can you converse? How can this discussion work? There are several tools, and look at the bottom of the screen to see how they work. You should see a white strip running along it. On the left edge, you'll see one button that has a number. It says 62. It's the number of people involved in this video conference right now. If you click that, up will pop two windows. The one on the left will give you a kind of film strip view of everybody who's here, so you can mouse over and learn more about individual people. And on the right side is a chat box. Now, that's a classic text chat. You type in text and people respond to you. And that is limited to the 19 or so people who have joined this forum with you right now. People use the chat box continuously during these sessions, I find. They often like to either have informal jokes, or they like to share resources that came up during the conversation. And sometimes people will want to ask questions through other means, and they use the chat function to start that up. Well, those other means are right there in that white strip. Next to the chat box button, you'll see a question mark with a circle around that. This is one of the easiest tools there. If you click on that, up pops a new window into which you can type a comment or a question. And when the time is right, I'll flash that on the screen so everyone can see it, and I'll read it out loud so everyone can hear it. And that's a pretty easy way to get in conversation. Now, the best one is if your mic is working and your camera is working and you're in a place where you can speak out loud, click the raised hand button. That tells us that you'd like to join us up here on stage. Now, if all the technology works together, then you can join us. And in fact, we can have up to 4 people here at once. So you can have me, yourself, another participant, and the guest having conversation like we're sitting around the table or like a pop-up panel. If you haven't done this before, it's really that easy to do. In fact, it's quicker to do than it was for me to describe. So please consider that if you have any questions or comments. It's really easy to do. Now, if that's not enough, if you are a Twitter user and you'd like to add your comments and thoughts through Twitter, just use the hashtag FTTE, and people will often put in questions or observations that way. In fact, we've already gotten a couple of questions that came before our program started today. So, Shindig makes available all those different technologies for participation. Please take advantage of whichever ones work for you. Think hard about using the video one, and you can participate. And we'd like to thank Shindig for making all this technology available for us. We'd also like to thank our friends and supporters on Patreon. So if you haven't seen Patreon, it's a crowdfunding site like Kickstarter or GoFundMe, and it allows you to subscribe to support somebody making stuff. In this case, it's me making all these different projects, the future of education and technology. So we have more than 110 people who signed up to contribute as little as $1 a month just to keep the lights on and the machines running. And we're really grateful to them. For people like Matthew Henry, Reddy Hargis, Jeannie Kim Han, Paul McConaughey, Robin DeRosa, William O'Shea, Hugh Blackmer, Kyle Johnson, Bob Johnson. You can see them here on the slide. We're really grateful for their support, and you can join them. Just go to www.patreon.com/Brian Alexander, and our thanks to our Patreons. So that's the forum. That's how it came to be. That's its purpose. That's who supports it. That's how the technology works. Now, let me unleash you on this week's guest. It's a real pleasure for me to welcome Peter Felten. Peter is at Elon University, where he wears several hats. He's a professor of history there, specializing in American history. He's a assistant provost of teaching and learning. He's also the executive director of the Center for Engaged Learning there. And somehow, in between those three functions, he has found time to write and research a great deal. Our focus today is on Peter's thinking and understanding about engaged learning and how best to engage students. What I'd like you to think about is the practices that you've experienced, either as a student yourself or as a teacher or as a supporter of teachers, and to think about ways that we can push this forward into the future. So let me dispense with this slide right now, and let me bring up the awesome Peter Felten. And in the meantime, prepare your questions. Now there's a dramatic moment where we have to make sure all the technology works where we're connected. Peter, can you see and hear us? Oh, wonderful to see you. Thank you again for coming, Peter. Where have we found you today?
So I'm here, which is great.
That's right. You're teaching a January term class on the crazy topic of engaged learning.
Yeah, for master's students in higher education.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Peter, I just introduced you with a frenzied sketch to help people get a better sense of you and what you do. Let me ask, looking ahead after January, for the rest of the year, what are you going to be spending most of your time working on?
Brian, that's an easy question. A colleague and I are writing a book. Manuscript's due October 1. It'll be out, we hope, in a year from the spring from Johns Hopkins University Press. And it's the quick version is it's making the argument that good undergraduate education, good higher education is relationship rich higher education, and that we know this, and that we can do this with all sorts of students in all sorts of contexts. So my colleague and I have visited 16 different campuses, including one fully online campus, this past fall, interviewing students and faculty and staff and administrators about what they do. So that's what's coming, an argument for more relational pedagogies and more relational institutions.
Terrific. Well, good luck. Happy writing.
Thanks.
Johns Hopkins is becoming quite a powerhouse on books about higher education.
Well, we hope. Our little contribution.
Well, my book should be out from them this fall too.
Excellent.
So let's. That's a terrific project. And so, just to get the ball rolling, in your work, what are some of the what are some of the proven techniques that you have found that everybody can connect with that increase student engagement?
Yeah. So I want to answer that in a way I hope that's satisfying, but maybe not quite as you ask. And there are great techniques. I saw Mark Carnes from Barnard is on here, and he's one of the developers of Reacting to the Past, which as a historian is a spectacular pedagogy.
Isn't it?
But I want to think one level up from sort of techniques to thinking. When I think about student engagement, I think about what do students need to be doing and what do students need to be thinking or believing, no matter whether they're in class with me or we're teaching online or I'm teaching chemistry or philosophy or whatever. And my quick shorthand for this goes like this, that we need students doing 5 things. They need to spend time and effort, right? Because real learning is not easy and is not quick. They need to be getting feedback and guidance on what they're doing. They need to practice their learning in different contexts, because one of the biggest problems I think with schooling is that we teach them how to give us answers in our context, and then they go out into the world and they don't know what to do. And then the last thing they need to be doing is they need to be reflecting on what they know, sort of metacognitive development. And if whatever you're doing with your students in whatever sort of context, if you have them doing those things, you're great. The other bit of this is they need to believe a few things. And the research in the last 10 years in particular has really gotten me convinced of this. They need to believe that they belong in your class and in higher education, because if they don't belong or they have belonging uncertainty, they're much less likely to be able to persist and to struggle. They need to believe they can learn what's being taught, right? They need to have a growth mindset in that way. And one that the psychologists don't talk enough about, I don't think, and the rest of us should talk even more about, is they need to find what they're doing meaningful, right? Purposeful for them. That's where the motivation really comes from, is a sense of, I know why I'm doing this and it matters to me. Sometimes people talk about things need to be relevant or applied. I'm a historian. History often isn't directly relevant or directly applied, but it can be really deeply meaningful or deeply purposeful. And so I think if we have students believing that they can do what they're being challenged to do and that it matters that they do it and they do it well, then we're golden, whether you're in a lecture hall or in a seminar room or in a dance studio.
So if we may just be done here today. You just thank you for all. The instructors, the staff have to structure classes that students spend time learning. They need to get feedback. They have to be able to practice learning in different contexts, and they have to reflect on it. In the meantime, the students have to believe that they belong there and that their learning is purposeful, it's meaningful. That's a fantastic strategy you outlined.
And guess what, Brian? We can influence all of those things, right? I mean, we can't give a student a sense of belonging, just like we can't learn for them. But there's ways we can structure what we're doing with our students and what they're doing with each other that either develops belonging or not, or that gets them to commit time or doesn't. So, but I'd love to hear, I mean, I'm wide open to questions, obviously, but I'd love to hear ideas from participants too about either challenges to that framework or ways that they enact this, or ways they can imagine enacting this. Especially there were some questions on Twitter about sort of the future and technology and distance and all this. And I'm really curious about what people see incoming.
Nothing you said was technology specific or technology averse. So this is a fantastic question. So friends, let's think about this. And we already have one question. This is from Brian Nielsen, and I'll put this up on the stage. This is from a man who spells his name the best possible way. How do we as instructors make it meaningful? Great question.
Well, Brian, I'd love to hear what you think. I don't actually think I'm not sure we make it meaningful. I think we create conditions or try to create conditions where students can find meaning and find a sense of purpose in the work. And that could be, some students, they really want to get an A or they want to get the highest mark. And so this is meaningful that I do this for that reason. That's not maybe my favorite kind of meaning, but it's an important one. But a second example of ways to find meaning, you can help students connect what they're doing in their own work for your class to what they aspire to. There's a biology professor at the University of Rhode Island, Brian Dewsbury, and I encourage everybody to go Google Brian Dewsbury, Soul of My Pedagogy. He's got this beautiful piece in Scientific American about teaching biology to mostly immigrant students at the University of Rhode Island. And what he says is he asks his students to reflect over and over on why they're taking the class. What's the purpose of this course for them? And he never corrects them. He never says that, Brian, that's a bad purpose. Somebody might be doing it because they want to go to med school. Somebody else might be in the class because they've been fascinated by biology all the time. Brian just keeps asking students to remember, why are you doing this? How does it matter? And the outcomes he has in his class are amazing. One last version of this, since I mentioned reacting to the past already, I teach sometimes with reacting to the past, which, if you don't know it, is an immersive role-playing way of teaching where students for 3 or 4 weeks will inhabit characters and compete and all this. And what I find in my reacting classes is that students care really passionately about their character being successful. And what's funny to me is they'll argue over who is the right person to succeed the Wanli Emperor in 1587 in China, when none of them even knew who the Wanli Emperor is walking in the door on the first day of class, right? So we can construct pedagogies that are meaningful because they're playful, because they're engaging, as well as because they connect to big questions or things like this.
Well, just as a side note, friends, we had Mark Carnes from Reacting to the Past as a guest, 2 years ago. He was a fantastic and inspirational guest and just a wonderful person. And his book is terrific as well. I'll put a link to that recording up in the chat box. I'll share it.
Yeah, the book's called Minds on Fire.
Which is exactly right. That's a fantastic question, Brian. Thank you, and a terrific answer, Peter. Again, friends, click the raised hand if you would like to join us up on stage, and use the question mark to share a question, like Catherine Beauville just did from University of Edinburgh. Let me put that up on the screen. This is: does the pressure to increase student numbers mitigate against student belonging? Subtle question.
Probably yes. And Kathy, I guess I'm inferring what you're saying, and if this is not right, let me know. You mean the sort of, we have to have more students and we have bigger classes and we have more pressure to get more people through our curriculum and out the door as quickly as possible. I think that can really create challenges for a sense of belonging for students, because if they feel themselves to be a number, or just part of the machine, that's bad. But one of the joys of this new project I'm doing about relationship-rich education is I've talked to students at 16 different institutions in the last 4 months around the U.S., many of them big, huge sometimes, comprehensive state universities, community colleges, and things like this. And the stories students tell over and over are about how much the words we say matter to them. So if a student feels like someone saw them and recognized them and saw potential in them, that can be really transformative, and that can convey a strong sense of belonging, even if that student is drifting. So one quick story about a student, Latino gentleman, he's in his mid-30s now, at a community college outside of Chicago, told me the story of he had gone to the state university there, the University of Illinois, as an 18-year-old and flunked out his first semester. Just was overwhelmed as a first-generation college student, far from home and all this. 10 years later, he'd had a couple kids, he was married, he was working, he really wanted to do better for his family, and he'd always wanted to be an engineer. So he goes to the local community college and enrolls in calculus. and struggles mightily in the first few weeks. And he goes to the professor after a couple weeks and says, I'm not sure I can do this. And the professor says to him, don't do your homework for next class. Read this article. And he gives him an article on impostor syndrome. And the professor says, come talk to me, Joshua, before the next class. And so Josh reads, is sort of perplexed that the answer to doing well in calculus is not doing your homework. And he reads this article on imposter syndrome, meets with the professor before the next class, and says, the article was about me. I didn't know it. I never heard of this before, but that article was about me. Joshua's now got a full ride to an engineering school in the Chicago area to get his bachelor's degree. It's going to be a nuclear engineer. And he says it was because that calculus professor sort of looked him in the eye and said, you can do this. You're not alone. And so to Kathy's question, what can we do with scale that allows that to happen? And one thing that I think does work very well, I saw this at a lot of community colleges, is peer support. So encouraging peers to get to know each other, to study together, to challenge each other, to support each other, because we can't multiply us enough for all of our students.
No.
But the students do have peers, and if we can structure and support really excellent peer interactions, a lot of belonging and success can come from that.
And that's how we can scale this.
Yeah.
Well, that's a terrific question, Kelly, and a great answer with a terrific story. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, and Kathy, I'm curious what you're doing in Edinburgh, which is a huge urban institution on these sorts of things.
A storied one. Catherine, if you can join us on video, let us know. We'll be glad to beam you up. Speaking of video, I think we've got her. Let's see if we can bring her up right now. My family has been on a Star Trek rewatching frenzy, so I'm just hearing the transporter noise every time this happens. So, Catherine, can you hear us? Let's give us the day
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Lovely. Beautifully. Hey. Welcome.
Brilliant.
Welcome.
Okay, we have a clear line from Scotland to the States at the moment, and hopefully everywhere in between for all our collaborators. Yeah, I guess at the University of Edinburgh, that's been a challenge for us in terms of we're in a pretty big institution with 40,000 students, and we're really kind of testing ourselves in terms of thinking of ways in which we can kind of really ensure that we're trying to get these relationship-rich experiences for students that Peter's talked about. And one of the examples that we've been trying to kind of promote just over the last semester was to encourage staff and students to go out for coffee together. And it wasn't every single staff member and every single student within the university. It's pretty simple. It's pretty low tech. But actually, we were really bowled away by the phenomenal response that we heard back from people saying this really reinvigorated my sense of knowing why I teach in a university, because these students are so brilliant and bright and exciting. Students saying it was fascinating hearing like the teacher's perspective on what's going on within the department that we don't always hear about. And but the more exciting things were really staff and students realizing that all of them were kind of really into music or had other really shared experiences, and realizing that one another, they were all human. And that really, we shouldn't have to remind ourselves of that, but it really makes me realize how that larger universities can sometimes feel quite impersonal to students. And so this is why I was really interested to hear, Peter, your kind of response that that's actually a really powerful thing you said, that a student said how much the words that we say matter to them. Yeah. And I think I'm going to go away and kind of think about that in terms of how do we really get that message across to every single member of staff in the institution.
So, Kathy, thank you. And one Scottish to Americanish translation, staff in your context is what we would call faculty, which is fine. But let me give you a really specific example of this words matter. A different community college I visited, students kept saying, it took me a while to figure out that the faculty and staff at this institution always say when, not if. So they say when you become a nurse, when you become an engineer, when you graduate, not if you graduate. And the students said, no one had ever said that to me before. It was always if you graduate from high school, now if you go to college, and then if you study this. And they said the first several times people said, when you do this to me, I was like, wow, they think I can do this. And eventually the students being on campus for a couple terms, they say when to everybody. But by then they believed the when. So.
Yeah, I think those words really, really matter.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Catherine. It's wonderful to connect with Scotland, even as you start to move away from the rest of us.
We'll try not to build any walls.
Well, yeah, we'll try too. We're all on bad behavior. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
And let's see. So, friends, you can see how easy it is just to come up on stage. That was, even if you're in Scotland, that was easily done. So all you have to do is just click the raised hand button. In fact, let me just do this, make it even easier. I'll just put a little podium on the stage. So there's should be a teal color box now. And if you just click on that button, up you'll pop on stage. And we have another question that came in. This one came in just ahead of time from Steve Ehrman. And I just want to, it's a little detailed. I want to make sure that we can get this in. He says, I'd like to hear some powerful, attractive examples of how high impact practices can be enhanced, scaled, and sustained with the aid of digital technology. So there's the technology angle. Then he has a follow-up, but let me hear you, take a run at that one.
So, let me start by saying, my university, Elon, is a mostly face-to-face place. And so I suspect there's a lot more wisdom in the group than there is on stage, at least on this part of the stage right now. But one of the things where I think technology holds the greatest potential is in areas like e-portfolios that actually are integrative spaces, integrative ways to bring together, to help students bring together various parts of their education. So bring together an internship they did over the summer with the capstone course they're teaching right now, with other things. So it's literally a space to bring these things together. And then it prompts a kind of folio thinking, to use a phrase that I attribute to Tracy Penny White, a kind of integrative thinking that we don't prompt enough in our students. And so it's both a product and a process, which I think is really powerful. Steve, I know in some of our previous conversation we had a couple of years ago at the University of Maryland, one of the ideas I think you raised that I think is really exciting is thinking about student presence also, and saying, do students always need to be here to be in our courses? On my campus, you have to be physically present to win, but we have a lot of students, in Los Angeles doing internships, or in New York or in Shanghai doing internships. And I think it would be fantastic if, using tools like Shindig, they could be in class at the same time, so that you don't have to be resident in North Carolina this term in order to be in a class or two with us. So, but Steve, do you have ideas, or do you have insights, or do you have?
Please.
Yes. Do you have my audio?
We all do. Welcome,
Okay.
Steve.
Thanks, Brian. One of the things that I've seen happening is undergraduate research and service learning being enhanced, because using digital technology, even freshmen can tackle real world problems and make a difference for people outside the institution. So that's been really motivating. And sort of, I have this vague sense, which I haven't completely nailed down, that for any of the high impact practices that George Koo originally defined with Carol Schneider, that there are ways to do that. There are examples of practices where technology can qualitatively improve the value of that experience. So I know something about the examples that I've been collecting, and had been wondering whether you'd come across examples. I think the example of the ePortfolio is right on point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Steve, just a fun example that I don't fully understand, but I think is so cool. University of Waterloo in Canada has a project called Crowd Curio. It's Crowd and then CURIO. And it's a way of crowdsourcing certain kinds of research. And it's a tool for doing that. And I think it'd be really interesting to think about how to do that in large courses where every student could be contributing a small part to a much larger research project. In my own discipline in history, Mills Kelly, who's a professor at George Mason University, has done over a period of time this really interesting project in the suburban DC area where he has students in intro courses go out to old cemeteries and, find someone who died, let's say, before 1850 or something like this, and then do research to figure out as much as you can about that person and create a little digital tag that goes, on a Google map of the cemetery. So you can sort of browse the cemetery and, some of the people there's lots of information for because they were in newspapers in the 1800s or whatever. And some of them not so much, just census data. But it's really cool to be able to browse this cemetery in a way and say, who were these people and who are they related to and all this? And so students are getting to do a tiny bit of real historical research, discovering something that nobody knows now and contributing to a larger project. And doing that in an introductory course as a first-year student, to me, is so exciting because, again, that seems meaningful. It's not just I'm writing another 5-paragraph essay for my history TA to grade. It's, I want to find this person and I want to find out what I can about this person. And students sometimes will try to find out living relatives and all this sort of stuff because they see the connections already. And that's fantastic. But Mills doesn't say then track down a living person who's related to this. It's just find out what you can.
Yeah, Mills is an awesome fellow.
Yeah, and this Crowd Curio site is really neat. So I recommend it to people.
I've just shared that through Twitter and also through the through chat box. Steve, you had a follow-up question. You were really interested in hybrid, blended, mixed mode program designs. Did you want to follow that up?
Yeah, again, defining a hybrid or mixed mode or blended course is one where students spend less time face-to-face, more time with their homework, including online interactions with other people and so on. Intuition tells me that one should be able to exploit that to do projects and other high-impact practices that are of a different order, qualitatively different. It's always better than if the student's time is spent more in the classroom. And again, I just wondered what your guesses, your excuse me, or your experience were. The reason I'm asking is because a number of institutions are trying to systematically expand these kinds of offerings, but don't necessarily do that by saying to faculty, look how much more effective and how more multidimensional your course can be if you have students who are doing more of their work when they're not with everybody else at the same time.
Yeah. So two thoughts on that, preceded by, I bet there's lots of wisdom in the crowd here. So my words shouldn't be remotely the final words. One is Florida International University in Miami has done really remarkable work on blended introductory courses. If you look in their biology program, for example, in the STEM fields, but in others too, because the state of Florida started mandating a certain number of blended courses. And my sense is the original response was, oh crap, there goes our outcomes and all this. And what they did is they got a number of really great faculty engaged in a process of redesigning these courses fundamentally as if they should be blended rather than They should be face-to-face. And the outcomes from the blended courses were so much better than the outcomes for the face-to-face courses. And better meaning not just more students succeeded and passed those courses, but the students did better in follow-up courses, face-to-face or blended, that they actually started reinventing the face-to-face courses based on the principles of the blended courses. And those principles involve being really purposeful about what everybody's doing all the time, having students do powerful or meaningful work, and then collaborate outside of class using virtual tools to give each other feedback and all this sort of stuff. So anyways, it's funny because Florida International sort of flipped what at least I thought about this. I generally thought blended was worse than, and they're like, oh no, blended is preferable to in their context. And then Steve, thinking about upper level courses and graduate courses, I mean, I think we have some models that we're not paying attention to. There's things like executive education programs, that bring in people for 3 days and then they spend a month apart in 3 days. On my campus, we have in a number of fields, human service studies, which is like social work or something like this, where students are doing semester-long or year-long internships. Once a week, they get together face-to-face on campus to talk about their experiences, and then they spend most of their time, 40 hours a week, in internships. Student teachers do the same sort of thing, where they're together as a cohort and then out doing things. And I just think some of us, let's say historians, need to think about, well, what would happen if I taught a senior seminar that was less time together, knowing that that made more time and higher expectations for students to spend time in the archives or collecting oral histories or things like that. And so that we don't, back to the Florida International example, we don't presume that time with us is the most precious thing students can have. That really the most precious thing is guided work that they can be doing. And that's how they should be spending their time.
Do you happen to have a name of somebody at FIU that I could follow up with?
Yeah, and apologies to my friend and colleague who I'm just going to out here. Her name is Isis Arce Vega, ISIS. First name Arce, middle name or last name is ARTZE-Vega, VEGA. She's vice president for teaching and learning. But they have, I can send Brian after we're done. She's done a bunch of writing about gateway course reform, but they have done really remarkable work, and they've gotten a number of major grants from Gates and people like this. And so they can demonstrate that thousands more students are graduating because of the way they've reformed these introductory courses. It's really impressive work. Yeah, and at a school with 54,000 students, a 10% change is pretty big.
Again, we're at scale. Steve, thank you for the question. Thank you very much. Friends, I just want to remind you that we're about 20 minutes before the end of the hour. This is the great time for questions of your own, and also for answers of your own. Peter has very kindly, in the great spirit of the forum, been asking you questions to think about. And so far we've talked about not only how you have seen implementation of such practices, but also how you've seen them use the technology, with blended learning, and how they work for you. We have one more question that came up, and I want to put this up on the screen. This is from Kim Hale. How can library staff be part of the institutional student engagement? Great question, Kim.
That's a great question. And Kim, I'd love to hear about what you're doing and what you're thinking. A couple reactions. One is that I think we who work in higher education see distinctions in titles in a way that students often don't. I think many students often think we're all sort of the same and we all know each other and we all understand how the whole system works. But I'm not sure that students don't already see librarians as an important part of engaged learning. But I think a lot of students, especially students who are feeling uncertain about whether they belong in higher education, are intimidated by libraries and librarians, right? It's like, I'm going to come and I'm going to ask some sort of stupid question like, what's a bibliography? In fact, I interviewed a colleague and I interviewed a student for this project at a community college in New York City who said she almost dropped out her first semester because there was a bibliography assignment and she didn't know what that was and she didn't want to ask anyone. She couldn't figure out how to spell it. So when she was Googling, she was spelling it wrong. Her first language wasn't English. So one of the things you can do and be is be present for students and be welcoming to students and be encouraging to students, sort of everybody who comes in the library, to see that librarians aren't scary and librarians aren't trying to shush them, and librarians actually have a lot of knowledge and capacity. So that's one thing. And then a second is thinking about who are your instructional partners in this. So how more and more can we think of not just it's my course as a historian and I'm developing this course, but it's our course. And we're working together on this, because when I send my students to go read stuff, they're going to your library and they're asking you questions because I have unclear assignments. And so if you can help me develop and clarify those, that's better. There's been some really interesting work at the University of Kansas. Andrea Greenhoot and colleagues there have done some really cool work where they put together teams to redesign large introductory courses. And those teams always include at least one librarian, both because the librarian brings lots of knowledge and capacity, but also because the librarian can be a real asset in the teaching and in the work the students do. And so thinking about who can you partner with on campus? Where are the students already, and how do you get librarians in the way?
How do you get students? How do you get librarians in the way? Kim, this is a really good answer, or good question. I'm glad you brought in the library. And Peter, what a thoughtful answer.
Thanks.
The library has been a theme for the forum for a long time, and we're always glad to bring them up. We have a question from Sweden. Let me push this up. This is from Oscar Guetta, who asks, what do you think of students creating professional learning networks in relation to higher education and engagement? Good question, Oscar.
Good question. I'd love to know a little more about what you mean by professional learning networks. So I don't know if you can join us on stage or not, Oscar.
If you can, Oscar, please do. But that was fast.
Here we go.
He's coming from Scandinavia's most northernmost technological institute. So he's got to have this down. Oscar, can you see and hear us?
There you are.
I can see you. I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly.
Yes,
Perfect. Thank you for a great discussion and really, really encouraging. And I'm sorry for my language. So I hope that you, Brian, puts up the references in text later on, because I need to see them. Really, really encouraging. I think I think you said something really interesting, that one of the most important thing is this guided work, or I don't know how you put it together. That I think that is very important. And one thing that I try to kind of provoke our organization with is actually this kind of professional learning network that students should, during their time at higher education, start to build their own learning environment that are putting them on the border between the safe inner environment where we could do mistakes and try out things that we do not understand, and the outer environment where I meet people that are involved in that kind of profession I'm looking for, or in that kind of discipline that I'm looking for, to bring questions into the university and bring questions out from the university, and be more there, by that being more kind of meaningful, because I, as a teacher, needs those students to bring questions to me, things that they have, but also to challenge this, that I receive a lot of information, and how do I react upon so because you had this I think this nice way to putting it, you talked about practicing feedback and guidance and spend effort, and I think that one of the things is actually, how could we put the student into a position where the effort they put into action really pays off, and they start to build up this relation with with
Right.
a word they will enter, and also keep the relation to the university, so that they don't leave the university as a part of their history. Sorry for a long
Right.
That's
No, Oscar,
great.
that's a fantastic question, and in some ways the most important question I think we can be asking in higher ed right now. I think in the US, too often students come to university, come to community college, and they think education is being done to them, and their job is to sort of put up with it until they're finished. And what we really need to do is exactly what you're describing, which is help our students see themselves as agents in their own education, right? And so it's crucial that they're the ones who are leading and making decisions and making choices. And I think there's an irony in a lot of American, at least, teaching and learning right now, which is good teaching is highly, highly structured and has rubrics for all assessments, and everything is spelled out in great detail. And in some ways, that's really good. It's transparent, it's clear, it's equitable. The tension with that is it's also really constraining. Because if I come into any sort of environment and someone says, this is exactly what's going to happen for the next 4 months, and this is all the work you're going to do, this is how you're going to do it, and this is how I'm going to evaluate you, I think I'm not interested. So how do we build educational spaces that are both transparent and equitable and clear to all our students, and then open enough to say, what are you going to do and how are you going to do this? And Oscar, this has come up on my campus quite a lot. And there's a phrase from someone, maybe Kathy or someone from the UK can give us the reference, that I read a year or so ago by a UK scholar who said, what we need to do is think about higher education as being lifelong and life-wide. And the idea is, not just preparing students for the next 4 years or whatever, but preparing them for 60 years of work, let's say, or 80 years of being citizens, but also for all of the ways they're going to live and work. So they're not just going to be an accountant, but they're going to live in a world that's struggling with environmental challenges or civic challenges or things like this. So how do they manage that? And we can't just give that to students. We need to say to them, this is your job. Is starting to build that personal learning network, to use your phrase, so that when you graduate, you have a set of knowledge and capacities and relationships that can help you do that lifelong and life-wide work that's in front of you.
But I think that this is a huge challenge for the students, because they have been kind of into this structure with good teachers for a lot of years, and now you're kind of changing the game plan, you're changing the rules in different ways. But what I have realized is one of the huge challenges is trying to actually convince the university that because we are giving the students another power, we are losing control. We are inviting the uncertainty. We are inviting the thing we don't kind of could measure or control. I think that we in that case help the teacher to actually become in a nicer position, if they could be more equal, so to say. But still, that is challenging the whole identity of the university as a deliverer of knowledge. So I'm a little kind of thinking a lot of how do I engage the university in or the higher education practice in this kind of work.
In a revolutionary way.
Oscar, wow, just the small questions from you. No, that's I think that's a fundamentally important question, and I think it's one that is part of the reason we need to be contending with that is because of what's happened with technology. I mean, when I was an undergraduate in the last millennium, if I wanted to know some fact for a history course, I had to go to the library or go talk to a faculty member. That is not the case now for students. So if universities aren't the collectors and repositories of knowledge, what are we? right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
think we need to be thinking about what is the role, and that has implications. What I really liked about the way you talked about that is we need to think about our own roles and our students' roles. We also need to think about what success looks like, because I think assessment in this country, at least, has always been about sort of quantifying things and measuring small gains. A colleague at the University of Iowa asked me a really interesting question in December. He said, so what would it be like in this country is if instead of having psychologists and psychometricians driving the assessment movement in the US, we had anthropologists guiding what it means to think about learning and all this? What would we be looking at and what would we be counting? So I think it is a time for us in higher ed, in our own work, and then more broadly, to be thinking about what are the foundational assumptions we have. It's Oscar, like you queued this up for me. One of the really exciting projects I think that's happening around the world right now in teaching and learning in higher ed and engaged learning is work around, it's called different things in different places, but let's say students as partners in this way. So reframing students as from the objects or the customers to partners. I've started using agents in some work like this. And anyways, and so one of the links on the screen is to something called the International Journal for Students as Partners, which is a relatively new journal. It's out of McMaster University in Canada. And a lot of the journal has student and faculty, staff, editors, and a lot of the articles are co-written by students and faculty. And it's about what happens if we've repositioned students in fundamental ways in teaching and learning, recognizing, like you said, Oscar, that is hard. And it's hard for us and it's hard for them because many of them got to us because they were good students in a very traditional thing. They come into my classroom, I say, let's be partners. And they're like, no, thank you. Just tell me what I need to tell you. I will tell it to you. None of us will be harmed, and I'll get my A. And so I think this is long-term work. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Oscar. Tuck, that was really, really good. And have a good night. And thank you again, Peter, for a fantastic, fantastic answer. Really taking a dive into this. We have a quick comment from Kim Hale. I just want to put on the screen, not a question, but a good comment, which was one thing we can do is to be present at every college-wide event, orientations, welcome week, etc. I think she's speaking about librarians, but I can see that for everybody as well. Friends, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to put up one question. This is from Jennifer Albot at Southern Illinois, who asks, can you suggest the best method for grading reflections? What if the students completely miss the point? Pass, fail, real points? Good question, Jennifer. Real detailed.
It's a great question, and I'm glad we have 20 minutes to dive into it. So a couple thoughts on this. First is I think we should assume that students don't know how to reflect in the way we want them to reflect at the start of a course or the start of a program. And just like anything else we're teaching them, it's a learned skill. So I think the grading system, whatever we have for this, needs to reward development over time and sort of deepening reflective capacity. So that's part one. I think we shouldn't hide the ball, hide our goals from students. I think sometimes we say reflect and they don't know what we mean. And so they guess, and then we grade them and we say, well, that wasn't critical enough. And they're thinking, I didn't know I was supposed to be critical of myself, or I didn't know I was supposed to describe in detail. So I think giving them a structure, an old, very common, but very helpful one from service learning, is to say your reflection students should include three things, answer three questions. What, so what, now what? You may be familiar with this. What is a description of whatever it is? So what does that mean in that context? And now what are the implications beyond this one instance? And then I think you can grade for completion or for thoughtfulness or something. But I'm more inclined in my own grading for reflection to steal something I learned from Bill Condon, who used to at least teach writing at Washington State. So have my students reflect multiple times over the semester, let's say using a so what, now what frame. And I'm giving them feedback as they go, but they're just getting credit or not credit for doing it, for completion. But at the end of the term, they have to write a reflective essay, and the texts for that essay are their own reflections. And I'm going to grade this essay, and it's about how do you learn and how do you grow over time in this course, or how did your reflection change, or something like this. The only text they can cite is their own reflections from the term. And just like with any other analytical work, if you only cite one source, your paper's not as good. If you can't provide evidence that you are asking certain kinds of questions or making certain kinds of observations at this point in the term, and then making different ones later, or struggling with this later, that's a good paper, right? And so I'd put more weight in the grade and more sort of ABCDF on that kind of analytical writing about the reflection, and more sort of completion on just regular reflective activities.
Oh, that's a great answer, Jennifer. Thank you for that very detailed question. Over in the chat, if I can connect two people, Oscar, there is a comment from Catherine Boville from Scotland, who asks or recommends a wonderful colleague at your institution, Ulrika Bergmark, who is doing some great work, and she wants to know if she'd be a good ally for you. So I'll email you that as well, just to make sure you get that comment. We're at the end of the hour, and we have time for one last question, and this is from Daniel White. This is a recommendation, actually. Daniel recommends reflection frameworks such as Van Manen in the 1970s or Baxter and Magolda in the 1990s or 2000s allow for reflection levels and types of development awareness. Thank you, Daniel.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's really good stuff. I hate to say it, but we are at the end of the hour, and you have just raced ahead into the future of where we can grow and improve learning. Peter, thank you so much. This has just been terrific. And I have to admire you for how much you're engaging with participants and asking them questions. What's the best way for people to keep up with you? How can we find out about what you're discovering and what you're finding?
Yeah, well, probably the easiest way is Twitter. And I think my Twitter handle is somewhere out there. In the Center for Engaged Learning, there's a link down there, has a blog that is really great. It's mostly written by my colleagues because I'm too busy running around like crazy. But I have great colleagues who are really thinking hard about issues around good practice, and issues around equity, and issues around student agency. So.
Excellent. And I think when you go back to Twitter, you'll find people have been tweeting at you quite a great deal. That's P. Felten NC. And one quick question. The life-wide expert from Britain, is that Ronald Barnett?
It could be. It could be. Probably is. Lifelong, life-wide. Yeah.
Yeah. I found an R. Barnett, and then I found the full name in Life-Wide magazine, which I didn't even know existed. That's
I think it's an interesting frame.
Well, again, thank you, Peter. We're going to have to follow up with you next year when your notebook comes out.
Thanks.
And let me thank everybody for great questions. But don't leave yet. Don't leave yet, because we have to point out what's happening over the next week, and what's going on with the new aspects of the forum. So first of all, next week, we continue on the gaming theme that began in the hour with Sue Boll, who is the creator and curator of one of the biggest gaming and learning conferences out there. So we're going to have a serious play. So we're going to explore how best to use gaming for learning in and outside of academia. Now, we just finished our book club reading on Twitter and Tear Gas from Zane Tufetsky. So if you'd like to add more comments, and some of you have been doing so, to the blog, please do. In the meantime, think about what other books we should be reading next. Now, you can find more books on our bookstore, and all proceeds go to keeping the lights on here. So we recommend that you buy books there if you can, including at least 2 that Peter helped write. If you'd like to keep talking about these issues, including student engagement, you can find us all over social media. We have Future Trends Forum groups on Slack, LinkedIn, and Facebook. You can follow me as well as Peter on Twitter. You can find Shindig all over all different social media platforms. So in the meantime, thank you all for terrific questions. This has been a great session. Overall, I'm really looking forward to the recording. And in the meantime, we'll see you next week. Thank you all.